All right, welcome back to Resilient Voices and Beyond. I'm so excited to have the guests that I have on today. But before we get into all that, I just want to give all my gratitude and thanks to all the people who are supporting Resilient Voices and Beyond, supporting me, and the work that I'm doing. I definitely could not be here operating this podcast or doing any of the advocacy work that I'm doing without you guys' continual support. And I just want to thank all the guests that I've had prior, for showing up and being here and supporting me and supporting this platform. So thank you all, truly from the bottom of my heart. I appreciate all that you guys do and all that you guys do for me. If you so happen to have stumbled across this podcast and don't know who I am, my name is Michael D. Davis Thomas, aka MDDT Speaks. Yes, it is my initials. I spent a little bit over 11 years in the Michigan child welfare system, 5 being in the juvenile side, and then 6 being on the foster care side of things. I started advocating at age 15. I have 10 years in this child welfare arena, doing a little bit of social work, policy and programming, working corrections and juvenile facilities, and working as a youth care worker and a supervisor and a program manager for a couple different congregate care facilities. I currently work 10 different jobs, sit on 15 different boards while going to school part-time, and you name it, I do a lot. But this is not about me, because I can go on and talk for days. Without further ado, I'm gonna have my guest introduce herself.
Hey, first of all, I just want to thank you, Michael, for having me on this show. I think it's just really great and incredible the work that you're doing to be able to bring out resilient voices and beyond. My name is Amnoni Meyers. I am the best-selling author of You Are the Prize, Seeing Yourself Beyond the Imperfections of Your Trauma. I'm originally from Boston, Massachusetts, whoop, whoop, but I currently reside in Tulsa, Oklahoma through the Tulsa Remote Program. I just finished my first year in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We survived, and I am here for about another year. So I'm just excited to be here with you and looking forward to getting this thing started.
Awesome. I just want to first start by saying I've watched some of your work and have read your book. I love what you're doing. I love what you're about. I love your walk. And I'm excited to hear about your journey. So my first initial question, let me give you a little background. So within building this podcast, one of the biggest things I wanted to do is be able to highlight the individuals behind the work. As well as I know, doing this advocacy and what have you. A lot of us, we show up for panels, we do this, but there isn't a lot of background. And I feel, or at least I was one of those kids when I used to watch people who I wonder how they got to here. I get them here today, but how did they get here to, do this? So my first initial question is really kind of building that timeline, of what I wanted to know for the people who were speaking and I was watching from that little kid standpoint. So when did this all begin for yourself? And feel free to share to whatever depth you're comfortable with.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think that you start off with that's a really good question to start with, because I think that it's important for people to understand that in order for you to really, truly understand success, you have to understand failure, you have to understand struggle. And so my life started at struggle. I was born during the crack epidemic in the late 80s and was born to parents who were drug users and didn't necessarily know what to do, didn't have the resources, didn't have the supports to help them in their recovery and addiction until a lot later on. But that's what really landed me in the foster care system. So I was born into the system. And then at 6 months old, my father had told my great aunt that he had some kids in the system and if she'd be willing to raise them. And I want to add that my great aunt, she was older. She was upwards into her 50s when she started taking us in. And as an older adult, that can come with a lot. And so she was raising us while she was also a daycare provider. And so, and then we grew up in a time where trauma was not a thing. Trauma was not talked about. Therefore, I had sustained early childhood trauma at a very young age. At the age of 6, I ended up becoming sexually assaulted. I don't say becoming, I was sexually assaulted. And that was really difficult. And so I would say that that was really sort of the start of how I struggled with low self-esteem, low self-worth. I didn't necessarily think or know that I had a plan in place for my life. And so I sort of wandered through life trying to figure it out. At the age of 10, my mother got her life back together and took my siblings and I in. But even though she got her life together in terms of being off drugs, she was not anywhere in a place where she could emotionally support us. Therefore, physical abuse was going on, neglect was going on, and emotional instability was also going on. And for that, we ended up going back into the foster care system. And so from the ages of 12 to 18, I ended up being placed in the foster care system. And with that, we always know that there's challenges that come with that when a child enters the foster care system. And so not only was I separated from my mother, I was separated from my siblings. And I would say that that was one of the greatest harms that could have ever been done, because I had grown up 12 years with my siblings. And all of a sudden, I'm on the basketball court playing basketball, and I get called in by a social worker to tell me that we're no longer going home. It wasn't until we got into our first foster home that I learned that my little sister was no longer going to be placed with us. And just like you, she was placed in congregate care. And that was the spiral of her life. And so I would say that those experiences is what really led me into wanting to go into the helping field. I knew from a very young age, I wanted to help young people. I knew that I wanted to help myself. I had developed compassion at a very young age. And so I knew that I wanted to do something with that compassion. And so I ended up going off to college. I struggled in high school, I barely was about to graduate, but I ended up going and graduating, going off to college and studying social work and sociology, which then led me into graduating. And it was for the first time in my life that I had actually been told about a program. And it was actually through homelessness is how I found out about it. I got sent to a conference because during the school year, and actually during school breaks, as we know, if you're in college, if the dorms close, you're not there. You're not allowed to be there. And as somebody who grew up in foster care, I had nowhere to go. And so someone ended up sending me to a conference. It was one of my mentors while I was in college, sent me to a conference so that I didn't have to spend Christmas alone. And it was there that I found out about the Congressional Coalition on Adoption Institute's foster youth internship program. So I ended up applying, I got accepted, and I was so thankful because I had somewhere to go that following summer. And it was there for the very first time that I had been introduced to other young people who had gone through similar situations to what I had gone through. And it was our first time having the opportunity to be presented and to be able to talk about our struggles and our challenges in a way where it had to do with policy. And so from there, I wrote a policy report. And my policy report was focused on how do we train our foster parents? How do we train our caregivers in trauma-informed training so that when foster youth, young people who've been in foster care come into the system, they're not being dually traumatized, they're not being harmed, but that foster parents and caregivers are equipped with the right resources and trainings to be able to support a young person. That was then taken up into draft legislation by a senator. And from there, I presented that report to members of Congress and the White House Domestic Policy Council. And I was then invited to become an intern at the White House under the Obama administration, where I did more policy work and efforts. And that then led me to grad school. So it's really like a ripple effect. And it was from that experience of becoming homeless that it led me into all of these different arenas that I had no idea I would ever have the opportunity to be a part of. And so actually today, which I'm also really grateful to be able to spend this time with you, because 5 years ago today, my sister ended her life by suicide. And that for me was one of the most heartbreaking things that I had to ever experience, It was the grief, the loss, the confusion, all of that. Because my sister was someone who didn't get to survive the foster care system. She was trafficked out of the system. And so for me, that's what actually propelled me to write my book, You Are the Prize, seeing yourself beyond the imperfections of your trauma, because my little sister and best friend told me those exact words. She said, sis, always remember that you are the prize. You are the bomb. And she was someone that was very much proud of me. She, she spoke so well of me. She looked up to me. I was like an idol for her. And for me, while that was flattering, while that was exciting, while that made me happy, at the end of the day, it made me sad. It made me sad because the life that I got to experience on the other side of foster care is a life that she didn't get to experience. And I find that so many young people who've gone through the system don't get an opportunity to live on the other side. And so my passion, my work, her death has refueled me to be able to continue this work and to ensure that all young people who've been through the system, who are about to go into the system, who hadn't been in the system but needed to be in the system or needed to be looked after in a way that was able to best support them and their families. Because I do believe that more supports need to be placed around families, that they know that they are the prize at the end of the day. So that is a little bit of my journey. That's a little bit of my trajectory. That's a little bit of my time frame. And that is sort of what led me into where I am today.
Wow. I'm just taking all of it in. And for me, this is why I have this platform. This is why I'm doing this. I spoke about, I was recording earlier today another episode, and I spoke on that podcast that, the most important thing is to be able to highlight success and thriving, but highlighting success in a way that it explains it and it shows it for what it really is, because success and thriving is not linear and it's unique to that own individual person. And too many times in the arena of child welfare and our systems as a whole, we look for this outlandish and untangible society's view of what we should be or what the outcome should look like, and you and I know, from life experience that, two of the same people in the same car can, be given the same fortitude, but come out completely different, and too many times, unfortunately, people are lost because of the lack thereof, or the lack of, in the system. I want to go back because there's a couple things I want to touch on that you gave me in this time frame, but I want to go back, in the beginning of this all to your first reconciliation mentally, of what was happening in your life. What did mental health look like? What did self-care look like? Or was it even a thing? Or were you conscious of it, when these transitions were happening with your family and with yourself, and unfortunately with the abuse that you endured?
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that I think about is sort of my journey, through that, as you share that, right? And one of the things that I would say helped me, but also harmed me, was religion. Because in some ways, religion was able to help me understand that there was more to life, that there was more to live, that it helped me make meaning and make sense of my trauma at that time. But what it also did was it also prevented me from being able to properly process through it, because I was, in a lot of ways, I was suppressing it, because the messaging that I got was, you just need to pray it away. God's got you, all of those different things. And what it ended up doing was it didn't allow me to process through what was happening at that time. So I just began to stuff it down. I mean, I was a child that took in a lot. I was quiet. I mean, I was also rambunctious, I was boisterous, I was all of those things, but the inner core of me, I was quiet, I was shy, and I had a lot of low self-esteem. And so for me, it wasn't until I went down to Hampton University, I was a student there, and I had my first panic attack. Actually, it was my second. My first one was when I first went off to college and my stepfather passed away. I had my first anxiety attack there. But the most not the one that had the most impact, I would say, was the one that I had at Hampton University, because it was at that time that all of the things that I had buried inside of me was coming up, and I didn't know what to do with it. Now, as you know, we are superheroes. When we grow up in foster care, we're superheroes. We can do everything and anything.
Mhm.
So not only did I make the dean's list, but I was here really struggling with my mental health. And it was the first time that I ended up going to see a psychiatrist, because I will tell you, I was in therapy from the age of 6 up until now. But it was the first time that my psychiatrist had ever given me a diagnosis. And it was post-traumatic stress disorder, major anxiety, major anxiety, and panic anxiety and major depression. And then later on, ADHD. And for some, that would scare them. For me, it was overwhelming, but it was the first time that I had ever had the opportunity to say, wow, this is why I am the way I am. I can now explain, I now have something to understand what it is that I was going through, what is it I was experiencing. So I ended up going into a residential treatment program to really help me sift through the traumatizing childhood that I had. And what it then led me into was community. I ended up going to a Christian college and being surrounded around community, because that was where I noticed that I needed the most support. Because for people like us who've experienced rejection after rejection, people in community are the most important things that we value. I would say for myself, that is one thing that I really value, is community and people. And so I knew that in order to continue on my healing journey, I needed to be around people in community. And it was there that I continued to have healing. It was there that I continued to work through and process through my traumas. And the thing about it is that healing is a lifelong journey. It's not something that you just pick up and you work through and then you put it away. It's something that you're going to constantly be faced with, because we live in a world where we're constantly faced with trauma. Therefore, we're going to be reminded and triggered. But I now have the tools and resources to help support me through those times when I go through those different periods of time. So even today, I spoke at a conference, and what I did was I woke up, and it's cold out here, and I put on some shorts. I went outside. I know it sounds crazy, and I let my body feel the cold temperature. Because when you let your body feel, you get grounded. It redirects your body temperature. Holding ice in my hand when I feel stressed, putting cold water on my face. I sprayed my face before I got here, just so my body can feel, And so it's not linear. It's something that you have to do in community with support. And what I wanted to say earlier too is that you have to have access and opportunity, because success has nothing to do with who you are. It may have a little bit, but what success really is defined by is the access that you have and the opportunity that you have to be able to fully live out who you truly are. And if you have access, opportunity, and community and capital, you'll be able to do just that. And so I'm a big proponent of that as well. And I think that people really need to understand that when people are going through and experiencing trauma, there are various things that young people and people like us still need, and even though we're out of the foster care system, it doesn't mean that we're still not experiencing impacts of it. Therefore, we have to have a community that provides that support to us.
Definitely. It's crazy you mentioned that about, that lifelong journey of healing. Because a lot of people don't understand that. A lot of people have their own conceptionalities of it too.
For sure.
And for me, you have your trauma that you grew up with, that happened to you when you was a kid. For instance, and this example is for more so people who've been in the system and experience foster care. But you have your trauma that you grew up with. That trauma impacts you when you're an adult. You face it or you hide away from it. But eventually, let's say, for instance, you get help and you process it. Okay. You process it, you become aware of it, you understand it, you accept it, you forgive it. What happens when, and this is what we mean by lifelong healing, correct me if I'm wrong in this. What happens when, okay, you've moved from that place. Those scars are still there. The scars are going to be there for a lifetime. The bruises are going to be there for life. You've moved from the place of fresh trauma from your childhood to the place of, okay, I have trauma that was impacted by my childhood experience that can potentially be triggered by society's views or things that I may go through in everyday life, such as a relationship, such as a friendship, such as rejection, different things. For sure. So now I'm going through something in life, because I try to explain this to people, in the best sense I know how. But now I'm going through something in life that, say, for instance, I lost a job, and it wasn't so much of the job loss, but when I asked for clarification of what did I do wrong and so I can do better, my boss shrugged me off. Now that brought back feelings about why my dad leaving and not giving me a reason or an understanding of what did I do wrong as a kid.
Yeah, for sure.
So, and that's just an example of what we mean by that lifelong healing, because you never know. It may just sneak up on you. Like you may be.
It will. I know. And you don't even know. And it's interesting. You talked about two different things, right? You talked about acceptance and forgiveness, right? And I feel like, if I'm honest, those are the two things that I'm struggling with. And for me, part of it has been because it is hard for me to accept that as a child that I had to go through what I experienced and what I went through. And then I experienced even more trauma as an adult. And so it's been really hard for me to accept that. And I think that, like what you said, there's times when I accept it and there's times when I don't. There's times when I forgive, there's times when I don't. And it's just like the stages of grief. It's all over the place. There's no linear mode. There's nothing like that. And for many of us, like even for me, like I told you, I moved here from Tulsa, Oklahoma. Now, moving here to Tulsa, Oklahoma was a really great opportunity. I was not forced to leave my house. I was not evicted. None of those things were occurring. But the aspect of moving still brought up a lot of feelings, even if it was a good thing. The idea of having to pick up my stuff, to pack my stuff, and to be mindful not to put my things into trash bags, or if I did, to provide new meaning as to why I needed to put my things into trash bags. And part of it was because I couldn't afford to put all my stuff in all kind of other things. You get what I'm saying? But it brought up a whole bunch of feelings that sometimes you just don't anticipate. And we as a society have to leave room for people to grieve. And I think that that's really the core of it. We do not know as a society what it looks like to grieve. We don't necessarily know what it looks like to actually lose. And for us as young people who've grown up in care, we experienced early loss. And many people who are listening may not understand or may understand what ambiguous loss is. It's completely different from death. But ambiguous loss is, I had my mother and father, they were around. Even if I didn't see them, it was ambiguous because I wasn't sure if they were coming or going inside it or outside of my life, but I knew they were there. And there was that hope that one day they would return. With death, that's final. In some ways, it's not, depending on how you think about it. But in this lifetime, it's final. And so people don't necessarily even know what it looks like to grieve ambiguous loss. And a lot of our children that are going through the system today are experiencing ambiguous loss. They're experiencing traumatic grief and separation, the loss of siblings, the loss of their parents, the loss of cousins, the loss of grandparents, the loss of community, the loss of school, the loss of church. There's all those things that we don't always consider as protective factors that we have to get back to. And when we start to get back to that, then we can then understand how valuable family and community actually are. And I don't think that as a system, we actually truly believe in our community. We don't actually believe in our parents. And we don't actually believe, even in the system. So I think that there's a lot of work to do when we talk about loss, when we talk about grief, when we talk about triggers. And I don't know if we're ready or we're prepared for that.
Definitely. I can, speaking for myself and my own experience, part of the ambiguous loss I experienced was childhood itself. I entered into the corrections part of, the system at 11. I didn't see a birthday and still find it hard to actually celebrate my birthday, being 25, but I didn't see a birthday until 20. Having those childhood memories, playing a sport, having a parent at a sport, having a loving family, a nurturing family, all those different things, just not having that. But the biggest part for me, and I believe I spoke about it on my podcast before, is the fact that, I've went through the whole aspect of accepting what happened, forgiving both of my parents, not excusing their abuse, but forgiving them, and knowing, and what helped me forgive them is knowing they wasn't given the tools to be parents. That doesn't excuse their actions, because there should have been a decent moral standard and value as a human being to not beat another human being, but we don't understand how much it means to have guidance as a child, and what that does to an individual to not have any guidance as, going into adulthood and transition that on to have their own kids. And the biggest thing that helps give us an example of what I mean by this is we have a system. It's called the child welfare system that is being used as a parent supplement, but we see that you can't supplement the love of a mom or a dad or a dad and a mom, whichever, but you can't supplement parenting. And by supplementing, you see the outcomes. You get one that make it, 5 that don't. One that make it, go to college, 5 that get hooked on drugs or in prison, or, unfortunately, falls prey to the ambiguous loss. And depression sinks in, and there's so many different things you can name. But I wanted to share that personal aspect because it's so true. It's so true, and it affects us all. But my next question goes into, because you mentioned it, to you, what does it mean to be trauma informed in our today?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And of course, as we're speaking, the maintenance man is here trying to come in. So I'm gonna ignore him for a little bit. But when I think about trauma informed, I think about how we go about treating others, but not just about how we go about treating others, how we go about treating ourselves. And I think it starts internal, it starts within. It starts with, how do you also then use that to open up how you develop best practices. To me, it's about if you have a student in your classroom who may have a learning disability, who may be in the foster care system, who may also be in the criminal justice system. It's about how do you create a learning environment that every single one of those kids in that classroom can thrive. And it's not just based on that one student, but that equity that you place into your practices, your learning practices, then affect the whole entire classroom, because you created a policy, you created curriculum that might be based on that one student, but that can impact the whole entire system. And so the way that I think about it with young people in foster care, every single child that enters into the foster care system has experienced trauma just for the very fact that they have been removed from their homes. It doesn't matter if how negative or how quote unquote bad their parent did them. It still doesn't mean that they have not experienced trauma. Therefore, what does it look like when a social worker comes up to that house? Now, are you culturally informed? Because we know that majority of our children that are in the foster care system are black and brown. So who's showing up at that door? When we know that Black and brown families have a harder time trusting those that are in authority because of what has happened to us. What does it mean when you take that child out of the home? How are you handling their belongings? How are you handling their family members? How are you handling and assessing the whole situation? Why are you there in the first place? That's where trauma-informed starts. Trauma-informed care also starts in the classroom. I was a social work student. Ain't no way that I'm in the classroom as a social work student, as a Black social work student, and the material that's being taught is not representative of who I am as an individual. What does the material say? Is it representative? Is it inclusive? That's about being trauma-informed. Now we have to also talk about being trauma responsive. How do we respond to trauma? How do we make sure that foster parents and caregivers have the tools and resources necessary? How are you including birth parents in this process? If you can. We love to also talk about the birth parents who don't have their rights. Let's talk about the birth parents who have their rights while also investigating why these birth parents don't have their rights. That's where trauma-informed starts. Trauma-informed care starts in the court, at the agencies, within the agency. How are you treating your staff? Because how you treat your staff is how you're going to treat the people that come in. Now, the other thing is, what are your systems? What does your building look like? Is it dark? Are people outside standing there loitering, accosting people when they come in where it's not safe? What do the colors look like when they're in there? Is there food? Is there something to drink? Are you being greeted by a police officer, or are you greeted by a staff member who says, hey, I understand what's going on. I'm gonna help you through this. So to me, it's a societal approach and how we have to think about trauma-informed care, how we think about being trauma responsive, and how do we think about equity and inclusion when it comes to our young people who are in the system. And that's just some of the thoughts that I have. That's not all of it and all encompassing, but those are just some of the things that, I have right now. But there's so much more that can be said. There's so much more that can be done. And it starts with having these kind of open conversations. We have to be honest. We have to be honest about our history. We have to be honest about how the child welfare system came to be and why is it still in place. And how it costs more money to take a child out of the home than it costs to keep a child in the home and providing those resources and supports to those families and to those community members. It starts with implicit bias. What you think about us, what you think about the kids that you place in care, what you think about their family members. That's where disruption was for me. my foster mother had struggled a lot with my mother, with my birth mother. And instead of seeing it as an opportunity to collaborate, it was used to weaponize not just my mom, but myself. And I got a 7-day notice. Wasn't my fault. So there's a lot that can be done. There's a lot that can be, said.
Definitely. I couldn't have put it better myself, you uplifted, community, inclusivity, culture, equity, very firm things that, need to be implemented in many different aspects of child welfare. But, before I even get into that, one of the biggest things that I've noticed about child welfare today, yes, there has been some transformative changes. But one thing you said is something that I continuously preach, is that how can we continue to try to implement a new policy, or I look at it as putting a new wallpaper up on something that has mold on the wall.
I think that I do. I think that beyond wallpaper, because we ain't using wallpaper no more. But we need to tear down the whole. We need to tear down the whole wall.
Man,
rebuild.
Just a complete redesign. Because as we talk about what it was built for, how it was built, our child welfare system directly intertwined with policing, and what have you. And we know when policing that came about to be able to control African Americans, and another aspect was the child welfare system to be able to condemn and break down African Americans and minorities, and a lot of that language is still embedded in the root policies and how states navigate. But we continue to build upon instead of separating out or tearing down or redesigning, which doesn't help, because if the root is infected, how can you continue to plant?
Yeah, you can't put you can't put wallpaper up. You gotta tear that down. And you're absolutely right. You gotta take the whole tree down and go back to the roots, where go back to like seeds, how we plant, how we replant, and I believe that it is something that can be done. But when you have power, when you have ego, when you have all of those things in place, people don't want to give up their power.
It's an industry now, So
it is.
People businesses.
It is. Thank you. Exactly. Yes, exactly. And I also just think about, even just like you said, it's just the child welfare to prison pipeline, school to prison pipeline, child welfare to trafficking, child welfare to homeless. If you think about it, child welfare is sort of that root. If you think about and you interview a lot of these folks that are incarcerated, that have been trafficked, that are experiencing homelessness, they have come from out of the system. And I think that what also makes it difficult is that a lot of states have different ways of doing things. And I think that what states really need to do is to individually and collectively look at their policies. Because again, we all live in different regions and we all have, there's all different sort of things that are at play, but therefore it has to be uniquely designed to the people that are there and for the people that are there. And when you have that, you have to have those people in mind. You have to have them at the table, and not just have them at the table. You have to also pay them to be at the table, to lend their voice, their expertise into the rebuilding of that system.
Definitely.
And I think that, I don't know if we're ready for that kind of conversation. Equity and liberation start at the budget.
Definitely.
So when you invite somebody to come to say, we want to rebuild this system, have you also budgeted for that? Did you look at your budget? Did you include that in your budget? Or are you asking me to do it and then you're going to try to find a way of where this goes? That's an afterthought. Nobody wants to be an afterthought. And for that, you're perpetuating that old wound that I'm not good enough, that I've been rejected, and that my voice does not have value. And so I'm speaking from a lens of experience where I have been tokenized, where I have been asked to sit and be a part of groups and haven't been paid fairly. But I've been doing the work. I've been producing the ideas. I have been sharing.
Mm-hmm.
And even with my book, they would rather much use a book that a doctor, quote unquote, wrote, a white doctor that, quote unquote, wrote and did this research. But you have me talking about it from firsthand experience, talking about the struggles, the challenges that we face in care. I have part of the answer. You should be using my book in your trainings. You should be using Angel's book in your trainings, the Black Foster Youth Handbook. You get what I'm saying? So I think that a lot of times it's a lot of busy work. But if we want to get to the core of it, it's really about taking a step back and recognizing that power can be shared. Liberation can be shared. Liberation can be had. And just with the civil rights movement, when we came up with the civil rights law, everybody has benefited from that if you look at history.
Mm-hmm.
And you get what I'm saying? So we just have to do better.
Definitely. I've been doing this for advocacy, been in this arena, for a while. As you heard, I mentioned I've done a little bit of everything.
For sure.
Conveniently enough, I've done a little bit of everything. I do not have a degree. I've been
You shouldn't.
fortunate.
You shouldn't have to.
I've been fortunate.
Your experience is your degree.
Right. I've been fortunate to step into these areas, in these spaces. You can say by hint of coincidence or by purpose or by cause, but I've done quite a few couple internships in the social work realm where I've got to, be in the aspect of working with families, dealing with mental health, working with families, in the aspect of abuse and neglect and what have you. And then being on the other side, doing corrections, working in juvenile facilities, handling intake, being in the community, and then working in congregate care where you're seeing people completely lose hope in reality and in life itself, and all these different perspectives. And just to speak on what you just mentioned, in the aspect of equity, I have had to fight. I have had to fight so hard, to be able to stand on my own 2 feet. A lot of people know, and there's no secret to, that I don't share. Like, I'm doing this podcast, I work 10 different jobs, not for my own health, like if I could choose, I would love to relax,
Exactly.
But I work 10 different jobs because if I don't, I'm back at homelessness.
Yeah.
And that's a reality that's a reality for me. I want to be able to do what I love, but also I know by doing what I love, I can't do it for free.
Exactly.
I have to make sure that, I can at least pay the bare minimum of bills. And that should not, because I see a lot of people, in this arena when there's a lived experience person wanting to, share their expertise, but they are asking to be paid. There's a lot of people looking at them. Well, why do you want to be paid? What is your problem? What's going on? And that's mind-boggling to me because you have other experts with, no real lived experience. They've done the research, been in college, what have you, and they're asking for $10,000, and they go ahead and give them that. Exactly. But when it comes to people who've lived it, and it's a bonus that they lived it, but some of us, have went to college too and got the degrees, so it's, you have a double bonus. But when we're asked, or if we're even asked, because sometimes, I have to bring it up in conversation, like, hey, I don't do stuff for free, and stuff like that. I have bills, and it looks as though like we don't value what we're doing, or what we're doing is just for a paycheck or what have you. It's nothing to do with that.
Exactly.
And That's just something I wanted to uplift. But the other thing that I wanted to uplift that you mentioned, you said systems. And I want to embark in this because a lot of people are like probably gonna say, what you mean systems? It maybe just be the child welfare system. No, we need to get out of that mindset because all of our systems are tied into each other. Child welfare is tied into medical is tied into educational. All these things are tied in each other. Our educational system is poor. The stats says that itself. That don't have nothing to do with one culture or another. That's a United States full thing. Like we look at other countries and we look at our educational system compared, we can't even say nothing. We can't, So all of that, is really tied to one another. I know you have something you want to share.
No, I was just kind of like, I appreciate, first of all, I appreciate that we're able to have these kind of conversations. I don't know if you knew this is where the podcast was going. I didn't necessarily know this is where the podcast was going, but this is where it needs to go. We need to start having these deliberate conversations because there's no way, I think that you sharing that you work 10 jobs, that may be a badge of honor, which it is, but it also should not be. Mm-hmm. And that should not be at all. As a student, as somebody who wants to fulfill their passions, you talked about something very early on too, not about grieving your childhood, being in the criminal justice system where you're not even really even shown or taught that what you're going to be is who you're going to be. Mm-hmm. Therefore, normalcy is not even a thing. And I think that a lot of times these child welfare agencies and these places are asking you to do something that they would not do themselves. Mm-hmm. That they're showing up in spaces getting paid. How are you able to sit around the table? And I'm not even talking about even just those who want to just give out and dish out $50 per meeting. No, it needs to be equitable. It needs to be in line with the person's experience, with the market rate, with inflation, with liberation, all of those things. And I have a master's degree and I'm still fighting. And that to me is not good, because it really does shy you away from the passion that you have. Mm-hmm. The thing about it is that we wouldn't be doing this work if we weren't passionate. But the reality is that bills do need to be paid and things do need to be done. I mean, we're not receiving those ETV funds no more. What are they thinking? That happened years ago. Like, you think you're still receiving Chafee? We are not receiving that anymore. We're not receiving government assistance. And if we are, it does not mean that it suffices what's happening. And I think that we have to, again, really get down to when we say that we want to make changes within the system, we want to do all this good work, but then you have young people as an afterthought. And then you get upset when they're asking for what they want to get paid. And, what I'm noticing now is that the generation now that's coming up, they're not standing for that. And that's good. We want to be valued and we don't want to be re-traumatized because of our experiences within the system. And then I want to shout out those who gladly say, I want to pay you what you're worth. Mm-hmm. I've been in those spaces too. Definitely. So I also want to uplift that because those people are models. Definitely. For how it should be. When my little sister passed away, you know what my supervisor did? And she is Latinx. I'm just going to put it out there. She's a person of color. Mm-hmm. She's also somebody who has experienced loss. She experienced the loss of her sister. So when my sister passed away, you know what she said? Amani, I want you to take all of the time that you need. And I want to compensate you for that time so that you can take the time that you need to be able to heal, to be able to grieve, and to be able to go through what you're going through. Because when I was your age and I experienced the loss of my sister, I didn't have that. So you know what she did? She paid it forward. And because she paid it forward, it allows me to be able to do that. I'm not there just yet, but I want to be there because I don't want any other young person to have to go through what I experienced. And what she did, I mean, and that was for about 2 years that this person was supporting me, my supervisor. And that to me was has been one of the most meaningful things that somebody could ever do for me. The computer I am on, she gave that to me for my birthday. She bought it for me for my birthday. It was a big shock and big surprise. I wasn't expecting it. But she saw my value. And because of that, I'm still working with her today. So when you invest, you will get your return on investment. Mm-hmm. And that's what's important. So for me, I'm sad. Honestly, I'm sad to hear that you're having to work 10 jobs, because you should be able to be in a space where you can relax, where you can breathe. And many of us have not had that opportunity. When I aged out of the foster care system, I had to go right from school to work, to internships, to doing a lot of sweat equity where I was volunteering a lot of my time. So I just want to extend that to you. I know we going overtime and everything, but I just want to extend that to you to really help child welfare leaders to know that it really isn't easy out here. And we need your support. And your support starts at the budget and advocating for that budget.
Definitely. I appreciate you uplifting that, and definitely, I'm sharing that, because when we talk about the aspect of thriving earlier, we talked about that non-linear success. We talked about the pathway that each and every person chooses. We talked about community, equity, inclusivity, and all these different things, that need to be had. And I really would love to, just to continue the conversation, but unfortunately, we, limited in time. But I just ask you guys, as you listen to this, it may make some people mad, but this is just real, real stuff that is happening. And granted, even if I'm not able to reap any of the benefits of what I'm advocating for today and in my lifetime, I'm for damn sure gonna make sure the next generation has a better foot to stand on. Because it doesn't make any sense. One thing I've always preached about, and more actively preached about today in this more woken society is bringing humanity back into human service work. Somehow we have lost our way in thinking that it should be an industry, and foster care, child welfare should be an industry. And by doing it, granted, I know everybody has to have, everybody got bills they got to pay. I get it. But when we're adding beds, to make sure you can get this much or this much, and then it's not even going back to your own staff, or it ain't going back into the kids and stuff like that, it's an issue. Child welfare is $1 billion industry. Mm-hmm. I've worked in multiple facets of child welfare. To say that I have not seen that money been properly dispensed to the people that it served, or the people who are working and continue in the front lines to serve the people that it serves. So bringing the humanity back means bringing equity, bringing community, being conscious and that transformative change, and being trauma informed, education. It means getting into the communities instead of being the after effect when the abuse has happened, when the neglect has happened, being there before to be like, hey, we here, we're part of the Department of Health and Human Services. We wanted to just do a block party to talk about some of the services, the cash assistance, how to get off EBT, how to get into a job, how to be ready for, all these different things. Like, these are things that we can do to empower people, and to encourage them and support them, but also help them sustain what they get. It's not enough to just give somebody something, but to help them know why we gave it to them and how they can continue to use it, but also to get to a place where they can benefit from their own reaping is the place that we need to go. So that's just my little ramble. That's what my little thing. I really appreciate the time that you took out to be on here. I know me and both of us are very passionate individuals, and we probably could talk for hours on end on some very strong and much needed topics. I would love to have you back on, and in some ways, I'm still trying to figure out how to do all this editing. So maybe, when I figure out how to, expand my podcast or get some help, maybe we can do some live thought-provoking conversation on some of these hard topics that people don't want to hear, and what have you. But I definitely would love to have you back in some way, form, and fashion, to continue the conversation going. But I'm honored and I'm privileged, to have you on. And one thing you spoke about your sister, and everything, and that struck me really hard, and hearing that, because I experienced, I didn't have a blood sister, but I experienced a lot of people I was in care with, and they went down the congregate path themselves, and then they came out and wasn't the same, wasn't the same, and I lost a lot of them, and I consider them brothers, I consider, you spend so much time, you spend so much time with somebody, had to shower with them, everything,
they're your brother and they're your sister.
And if you don't mind, I really would like to, dedicate this episode, to her, and lift that up, because too many people that happens to it and falls through the cracks, and sometimes, it end up being too late.
For sure. No, I appreciate that. And, I just want to thank you so much for acknowledging that and honoring that, because, my sister was a fierce firecracker. She was just as passionate as me, if not more, but just didn't have the right resources and supports and tools to help her navigate through her own trauma. And so I also just want to again, uplift even my book, You Are the Prize, Seeing Yourself Beyond the Imperfections of Your Trauma, to learn more about not just my life, but her life. You can find it on Amazon. You can also find me at Instagram at You Are the Prize LLC. You can find me at www.amnonimotivates.com. And you can also find me on Facebook. But I just want to thank you all. Thank you so much, Michael. You're amazing. You're a gift. I also would like to gift you with a copy of my book. So tell me and show me how I can do that. But I just want to thank you, especially on the day of her life. I know that's something that she would want it. And so I just want to thank you. Thank you so much again.
Truly, I appreciate it. This has been very touching, and I'm glad I could be here for you and lend you this platform on a very special day for you to just share what you love to do. As we get ready to end, I know some things that we've talked about can be triggering. So I just ask if you've made it to the end, if you've made it to the end and hear me saying this, you take some time to center yourself, do some mindfulness exercises, and get back to baseline. But also if it's triggering and something that, you have never talked about or what have you, my contacts are out there. You can find me at MDDT Speaks on Instagram or what have you, and reach out to me. I would love to help you find resources, or connect you to whatever you need to start on that journey towards healing, or just resources for help, or just to have a conversation. I'm here. I don't want to feel that, this is a detached conversation. All these conversations that I'm willing to have them with you on a personal level. If you need that person to be there or to support you, understand. I do have capacity. I work 10 different jobs, but trust and believe, I would love to be there and help you. But also, COVID is out here. Cold and flu season is coming up and everything like that. Please, we are a part of this big old village. Please take care of yourself, because by taking care of yourself, you're taking care of your neighbors. And all of us, so if you feel yourself getting sick, go ahead, throw that mask back on. I know we don't I know we all be wheezing, can't really breathe in it and everything like that, but go ahead, throw it on there for whatever time you got to be in the grocery store. Make sure you got that sanitizer, but make sure, like, after you sanitize a couple times, you go wash your hands, because sanitizer doesn't supplement from actually washing your hands, and just be more conscious, during this season. A lot of people lost their life, during COVID. And for some people, that's still fresh. We're getting ready to go through holiday seasons where some people aren't going to see their uncle, their daughter, their mom, their dad because of COVID this year. So be conscious, about your neighbors, and when I say your neighbors, I mean, they don't got to say just directly close to you. It could be a friend or what have you, but your neighbor in life, just be conscious and supporting one another. Tell somebody good morning, tell somebody hello, tell somebody I love you, and stuff like that. Just share some kindness out there. As you guys know, this season 2, I'm going to be ending at the end of December, and I'm going to take a little break. Season 3 ain't coming out. I released 51 episodes in season 1, and I don't even know how many episodes I'm gonna finish out. I got a couple episodes lined up, but I don't think it's gonna be in near 50. It may be close to 30 or 29 or something like that. I'm not sure. But just know that I'm going to be taking the Resilient Voices and Beyond and creating a movement and an initiative to get out into the community in my state. And hopefully, if funding comes up, to be able to do it in a national effort, to just begin to have these hard conversations with policymakers, community leaders, stakeholders, lived experience, youth and parents, and just bring up some of the topics that was brought up between season 1 and season 2 and introduce those to the community, and if they're already introduced, figure out how we can create, a better pathway in those communities for help and resources. So there's no so we can alleviate those gaps and build bridges between agencies and people. But with all that being said, this has been Resilient Voices and Beyond, episode 20 of season 2. Thank you guys for joining with me. I hope you have a good night, good morning, good whenever you're listening to it. Just let it be good. Talk to you guys soon.